They laughed first. That was the thing nobody talked about afterward. Not the joke itself, but the sound that followed it. 40 or 50 voices catching the rancher's laughter and throwing it back at her like stones thrown at a fence post. Easy, because a fence post cannot flinch. He had said it loud enough for the whole fairground to hear, standing on the bed of his wagon with his thumbs in his belt, that no man in the territory would have her, so she ought to marry his bull instead, since the two of them had about the same temperament for taming. And then, not 5 minutes later, with the dust still settling and her face still burning under the September sun, she walked toward the reinforced pen at the edge of the judging grounds, the one with the double rails and the iron gate bolted twice, and let herself in. This is the part of the story Millbrook Crossing still tells wrong. The bull's name was Caesar, though most called him something less printable. He had put 2 hired men in the doctor's care that summer alone, and the rancher who owned him, the same man still grinning on his wagon bed, had spent good money reinforcing that pen twice, as if lumber could argue with an animal that size. 1,200 pounds of red and white muscle, a Hereford cross with a chest like a wood stove and eyes that tracked every man who came near the rail. Children were kept back from that pen by their mothers, without needing to be told why. She did not look like the kind of woman who belonged inside it. She was heavy-set, unmarried, past 30 by most counting, dressed in the same brown wool she wore every September, her hands red and cracked from a summer of other people's sick livestock. She had learned those hands alone, tending animals nobody else wanted to touch, ever since her father died, and left her with nothing but a barn full of work and no husband to do it for her. The crowd had laughed at the rancher's joke because it was easy to laugh at a woman like that. It cost them nothing. What it would cost them, they did not yet understand. She did not run. She did not carry a whip or a rope or anything a man might call sense. She stepped through the gate slow, the way she might step into a sick room, and stood a long moment doing nothing at all, letting the bull decide what she was. Someone near the rail called out for her to come back, voice gone thin with alarm, now that the joke had turned real. She did not answer. She began, instead, to hum, low, tuneless, the kind of sound a person makes without meaning anyone else to hear it, and moved one slow step closer, her palm turned open and low, the way she had learned from 100 nights alone in a barn, with something dying or something dangerous, and sometimes, she had come to know, those were the same animal. What happened next took less than 10 minutes. It changed considerably more than that. The morning had begun ordinary enough, which was itself a kind of mercy, since she had learned to distrust mornings that announced themselves as anything else. September had come in dry that year, the grass gone the color of old rope, and dust hung over Millbrook Crossing before the sun had properly cleared the ridge. She walked the 2 miles into town on foot, as she always did, her satchel of salves and tinctures riding against her hip, turpentine liniment for saddle sores, crushed slippery elm for colic, a jar of tallow and sulfur she mixed herself for screwworm, though she rarely said its name aloud, since decent conversation did not include such things. The satchel had been her father's, the leather gone soft and dark at the strap from years of handling. She had not replaced it. She saw no reason to. By the time she reached the fairground, the air already smelled of trampled grass and manure, of coffee boiling somewhere behind the church tent, of horses sweating under harness they were not accustomed to wearing for show. Wagons stood in loose rows. Children ran between them with the particular energy of a day promised to be different from all the others. She noticed, as she always noticed, which animals stood wrong. A mare favoring a hind leg near the horse ring, a milk cow with her ears pinned back too tight for comfort, and she noted these things the way another woman might note a neighbor's new bonnet, without meaning to, simply because her eyes had been trained a certain way for a long time and could not be untrained now. No one had asked her to come tend anything that day. No one needed to. She had built her place in the county not through announcement, but through accumulation. A horse saved here, a berth turned right there, a dog's broken leg set so clean the limp never showed. Men who would not have tipped their hats to her on the street came to her door at night leading a sick animal by a rope, and she rose without complaint, lit a lamp, and did the work. They paid her in coin when they had it, and in silence when they did not, and she had learned to expect the silence more often than the coin. She had come to the fair that morning for no better reason than to look at the livestock, the way another woman might look at ribbons in a shop window, not to own, only to admire the shape of something well made. She did not know yet that the day would ask something else of her. She only knew that the crowd near the reinforced pen at the far end of the grounds had grown thick and restless, voices rising over something that was, by the sound of it, already trying to be a joke. She had not always lived alone above the feed store, in the narrow room with its single window facing the alley and its floor that smelled permanently of grain dust and lamp oil. There had been a house once, with her father in it, and before him her mother, who died young enough that the woman remembered her only as a smell of lye soap and a voice humming low over a washtub. Her father had kept a small herd and a smaller reputation for gentleness, with animals that other men called soft-headed, until their own stock sickened, and they came asking. She had learned at his elbow, holding the lantern while he worked a breech calf free at 3 in the morning, learning the particular stillness required before a frightened creature would let a hand near it. When he died, 11 years past now, of a fever that took him inside a week, she had sold the herd to pay what was owed and kept only the knowledge, which no one could repossess. She rented the room above the feed store for $4 a month, paid on the first, and she kept it clean, in the manner of someone who owned little enough that cleaning it cost nothing. There was a bed, a trunk, a chair by the window where she sat some evenings mending harness leather for coin, and a shelf of jars containing salves and tinctures she had mixed herself from recipes half remembered and half invented through trial on animals too poor to complain. She rose before the town did, in the gray hour when the store below was still shuttered, and she went where she was called, to a barn 3 miles out where a mare was foaling wrong, to a soddy on the county line, where a family's only milk cow had gone down with bloat. She did not charge what the work was worth. She charged what could be paid. The town had settled long ago into a way of speaking about her that did not require unkindness to sting. She was called capable, which was true, and sensible, which was also true. And these words were laid over her like a blanket meant to cover the fact that she was 31 and unmarried, and built heavier than the girls who had married young and easily. She had stopped listening for the pause before people said her name. She had not stopped noticing it. There was a dignity in the work itself that she did not require anyone else to see. A horse that would not let another soul near it would let her near it. A calf given up for dead by 3 men with more strength than patience would breathe again under her hands within the hour. She measured her worth in these small restorations, quietly, the way a woman might count coins she did not intend to spend, only to know they were there. So she had come to the fairgrounds that morning wanting nothing more than the sight of well-bred stock standing in the September light, and had not yet understood that the noise gathering near the reinforced pen carried her name inside it. The pen sat at the far end of the fairgrounds, past the sewing tables and the pie judging, where the ground had been reinforced with a second rail of green oak, because the first had already been tested and found wanting. A rope marked a wider circle around it than around any other enclosure that year, and inside that circle stood the animal that had made the reinforcement necessary, a Hereford Cross bull of 1,900 pounds, red-brown and white-faced, recorded in the ranch ledgers under the name Caesar, though few in the crowd used the name. They called him the Beast, or the Devil, or simply pointed and said nothing at all, which was its own kind of naming. He had put 2 hired hands in the doctor's care that spring. One had lost the use of 2 fingers. The other had not come back to work at all. The rancher told this story himself, standing near the rail in a coat too fine for the dust it stood in, and he told it the way a man tells a story he has decided to be proud of rather than troubled by. He had a way of speaking that drew a crowd toward him without his seeming to ask for it, a wide gesture, a laugh pitched to carry, boots polished despite the mud. He was proud of the bull the way he was proud of most things he owned, as an extension of his own reputation, evidence that his operation produced what lesser men's did not. What the crowd did not know, and what she herself did not yet know standing at the edge of it, was that the bull's temperament had little to do with why the calving numbers on that ranch had fallen through the spring and summer, to numbers a man of his standing did not speak of at fairs. 3 cows gone barren that should not have been. A 4th calf lost in a birth that should have gone easily. The rancher blamed the season, the feed, the will of Providence, and did not look toward the hands who worked his herd with rope and goad, and impatience learned from men who had never once had to earn an animal's trust, only break it. It was a slow rot, invisible from the rail, the kind that does not announce itself until the ledgers are opened in a quiet room, and a man is forced to reckon with numbers that will not lie to him the way a crowd will. But none of that showed itself yet in the September light. What showed was the bull pacing the width of his pen with his head low, breath fogging faintly, though the day was warm, muscle moving under hide like something held just barely in check. The crowd pressed nearer the rope, admiring and afraid in equal measure, the way people are drawn to anything large enough to remind them how small they are. And the rancher, warmed by their attention, was already turning his eyes toward the edge of that crowd, toward a face he recognized, already reaching for a joke he had not yet decided not to make. The face belonged to a heckler who had lost money 3 years running on the rancher's stock, a thin man with a fondness for shouting what other men only muttered. He called out from the crowd's edge, asking whether the famous bloodline had gone the way of the man's luck, whether Caesar's calves were as scarce as they said, whether all that breeding money had bought anything but a bad-tempered animal nobody could get near. There was laughter at that, the loose kind that comes easy at a fair, and the rancher's jaw tightened the way it did when numbers he did not want spoken aloud were spoken aloud anyway. He answered too quickly, the way men do when a wound has been touched they did not know was still open. He said the bull's temper was proof of its worth, that soft things bred soft things, that a man did not want gentleness in a sire any more than he wanted it in a foreman. The crowd murmured agreement, the easy agreement of people who like the shape of a thing said with confidence, whether or not it is true. Then his eye found her standing near the back rope, apart from the others, as she always stood, hands folded over her apron, watching the bull with the particular stillness she gave to any animal in pain. He did not know why the sight of her steadied his tongue into cruelty, only that it did, the way a man reaches for the nearest object when he is falling, and does not think first whether it will hold. He said, loud enough to carry, that here was a fitting match for the beast, a woman built solid enough to hold her ground against him, since no man in the county had found the courage or the need to hold his ground against her. He said it smiling, the way men smile when they mean to be forgiven for what they are about to say before they have finished saying it. He said she and the bull might do well together, seeing as neither had found a partner willing to put up with their disposition. The laughter came fast and full, rolling back through the crowd the way laughter does when it has been given permission by someone standing higher than the rest. Someone repeated the joke to a neighbor who had missed it, and it traveled again, gathering more laughter in its second telling than its first. A few faces did not laugh, an older woman near the rope, a boy holding a rope lead who looked confused more than amused, but their silence went unnoticed under the noise. She did not move. She did not flush or duck her head the way the rancher perhaps expected, the way it would have made a better story for him if she had. She only looked at him for a long moment, the same still look she gave the bull, and then she looked past him, toward the pen, toward the animal pacing behind its reinforced rails, as if measuring something the rancher himself had not yet thought to measure. She let the quiet stretch until it had a weight of its own, and then she spoke, not loudly, but in the register of a woman accustomed to being heard by animals that did not care for volume. "Let me in the pen," she said. The laughter did not stop all at once. It thinned, the way water thins over a long ford, some of it still moving even as the ground underneath it changed. The rancher's mouth was open on the beginning of another remark, something meant to ride the wave he had already started, and he closed it without finishing. He had not expected an answer. Jokes were not meant to be answered. They were meant to be laughed at and then left behind, forgotten by supper, remembered only as a shape in the air that had made a crowd feel, for a moment, superior to someone in its midst. "That pen's not for looking at," he said, recovering something of his footing. "Bull's put 2 men in a wagon bed already." "I heard," she said. She did not look at the crowd when she said it. She looked at the rope line separating the onlookers from the reinforced rails, and at the latch on the gate, and at the animal beyond it, still pacing in that tight, deliberate circuit that told her more than any man's account of him could. Ordinary anger settled into the ground where words used to be. The hired hands had told her he charged, they said, at anything that moved fast, anything that moved without asking his permission first. She had watched that kind of anger before, in cows separated too young, in horses starved of gentleness and given only correction, and she had learned it was not usually the animal's own fault. The crowd's amusement had gone uneasy, in the way a fire goes uneasy when someone opens a door it was not built to have opened. A woman near the front murmured something to her husband. The boy holding the rope lead let it go slack, watching now with his whole face instead of half of it. The older woman by the rope shifted her weight forward, as if she meant to step in front of something, though she did not yet know what. The rancher glanced toward the pen and then back at her, and something in his face moved that had not moved when he made his joke. A flicker of arithmetic, quick and unwilling, the kind a man does when a bet he thought was already settled reopens itself in front of him. He could refuse her. Refusing would cost him nothing but the shine of the moment, and shine could always be replaced with more of the same coin later. He looked at the crowd, who had gone quiet enough now that the wind through the fairground poles was audible, the canvas awnings snapping once, twice, and he understood, in the particular arithmetic of a man who lived by being watched, that refusing her now would cost him more than granting it. "Suit yourself," he said, and reached for the gate latch. The latch gave with a sound like a knuckle cracking, and the gate swung inward, on a hinge, that had not been oiled in some time, screeching once before settling. She did not move toward it right away. She stood where she was for a moment longer, and anyone watching closely, and everyone was watching closely now, would have seen that she was counting her own breath, in through the nose, held, out through the mouth, slow enough that her shoulders barely rose. She had learned this from a milk cow that kicked, years back, in a shed with no light but a lantern, hung too high to help. Fear had a smell, she believed, though she could not have said what it smelled like, only that animals found it before a person spoke a word, and that the surest way to carry none of it into a pen was to spend it all beforehand, standing still, until there was none left to carry. She stepped through the gate sideways, not squared to the opening, and closed it behind her, without turning her back fully on the bull to do it. The animal had gone still in the far corner, head low, one eye tracking her, and one eye lost to the angle of its own shoulder, and she moved now along the rail, not toward him, walking a line that would bring her, eventually and without haste, into the wedge of space behind his left flank, where his vision thinned to nothing. Bulls did not see behind themselves the way a man imagined they might. There was a place, just off the point of the hip, a blind seam in the animal's sight, and she had learned over years of doctoring sick and difficult stock that a hand could rest there before an eye ever found it, if the hand arrived slow enough, and low enough, and without the sound of boots hurrying. The crowd had gone silent, in the particular way a crowd goes silent when it no longer trusts its own noise. The wind was the loudest thing at the fairground now, snapping the canvas awning twice more, and somewhere behind her, a horse stamped once in its traces and was hushed by whoever held its lead. She did not look back at any of it. She kept her eyes on the muscle along the bull's shoulder, the way it lay, the way it might tighten before it moved, and she matched her pace to nothing but her own breath. 3 steps, a pause, 2 steps, a longer pause, closing the distance the way water closes a gap in sand, without a line anyone could point to and say, "There, that is where she decided to be brave." She began the humming when she was still an arm's length away, low in her chest, no tune a person could name, the kind of sound a woman makes to a colicked calf at 3 in the morning when there is no one else to hear whether it works. The bull's ear turned toward her, not sharp, not alarmed, just turned, the way an ear turns toward rain before the rain is felt on skin. She let her hand hover above the hide without touching it, feeling the heat come up off him in a wave, and she counted in her own head the way she always counted. Not numbers exactly, just a rhythm that kept her palm from shaking. The first contact was 2 fingers, no more, laid flat against the blind seam of his shoulder. He shifted his weight from one foreleg to the other, a small concession, the kind of thing a man watching from the rail might miss entirely, but she felt it travel up through her fingers, like a question being asked and answered in the same breath. She did not press. She let the weight of her hand grow by degrees, the way frost grows on a window overnight, so slow that no single moment could be blamed for the change. The humming did not stop. She kept it going, even when her throat wanted to close, even when she heard, distantly, someone at the rail draw in air, like they meant to shout and then didn't. The bull's flank rose and fell against her palm, and she matched her own breathing to it without deciding to, the two of them drawing air on the same slow count, and she thought, not in words, there was no room in her for words just then, that this was no different from sitting up with a sick heifer through a long February night, only now, the whole county was the barn, and every soul in it held its breath instead of just her. She brought her other hand up, mirroring the first, resting it just behind the withers where the muscle ran thick and hard as a plow horse's. The bull's head dropped an inch, not surrender, something closer to permission. She stayed there, both palms flat, humming still, and let the stillness settle into him, the way silt settles into a slow river. No violence to it, only time and patience, and the absence of any reason to move. The wind cut off. The awning had stopped snapping, or she had simply stopped hearing it. She could not have said which. The bull's great head hung level now, his breath slow and even under her hands, and for the length of 10 heartbeats, she counted them against her own pulse. He stood entirely still, a mountain gentled by nothing more than 2 flat palms and a woman's low, unbroken hum, while behind her, the fairground held its silence like a held breath it did not yet know how to release. It was the laughter that broke first, somewhere at the back of the crowd, a single man who could not hold his silence any longer and let out a short, disbelieving bark that was not quite mockery and not quite awe. It might have spread, the way laughter does when people do not know what else to do with what they have just witnessed, if a voice had not cut through it flat and hard as a dropped board. That's enough. The man who said it had not spoken all afternoon. He stood near the pen rail, arms crossed over a chest built for hauling wagons through mud that would swallow a mule, and though he had said only 3 words, the crowd found itself listening, the way men listen to weather. He did not raise his voice again. He did not need to. He turned his head slowly across the gathered faces, and where his gaze landed, mouths closed. She did not see any of this. She was still inside the pen, palms flat against a hide gone warm under her hands, her hum trailing off now into ordinary breath, and it was several long seconds before she understood that the quiet around her was not only the bulls. The rancher stood where he had stood since the joke left his mouth, hat still in one hand, and he had the look of a man watching a fire he had lit burn in a direction he had not planned. His face had gone the color of old canvas. He opened his mouth once, as if to reclaim the moment with some remark that would put the world back the way he preferred it, and found nothing there. The teamster's eyes had found him too, briefly, and held. "She's earned herself a look at your books, I'd think," the big man said to no one in particular, though everyone understood it was meant for the rancher, and then he said nothing further, only stepped back from the rail as if the matter were settled and there was no more use discussing it. The crowd began to thin the way crowds do when the entertainment has stopped being entertainment and become something closer to a reckoning. Boots shuffled. A woman pulled her daughter's sleeve. Someone's dog barked at nothing and was hushed. Within a few minutes, the rail that had been 3 deep held only a handful of stragglers pretending they had somewhere else to be all along, and even they did not linger. She climbed out of the pen the same way she had gone in, unhurried, wiping her palms once against her skirt out of habit rather than need. Her hands did not shake. She noticed this distantly, the way she noticed most things about her own body, only after deciding they did not matter. The rancher had not moved. He stood with his hat still in his hand, looking at the pen, at the bull now standing placid and unremarkable as any old plow animal, and he did not look at her at all, not yet, though she could feel the weight of his silence following her, the whole slow walk back toward the fence. The boarding house room held the cold the way all rented rooms did in early September, without malice, but without mercy either. And she did not light the second lamp, because oil cost money, and she had already spent enough of the day on things that did not put food on a shelf. She sat on the edge of the bed with her boots off and her stockinged feet flat against the floorboards, and she thought, methodically, the way she thought about anything that mattered. The bull had not lowered its head when she entered. That was the first thing. An animal that meant harm dropped its head, squared its shoulders, showed the whites of its eyes before it moved. This one had stood with its head up and ears forward, watching her the way a spooked animal watches, not an aggressive one. Spooked animals could be reached. Aggressive ones rarely could, not safely, not in minutes. The scarring along its flank told the second thing. She had seen it before she was 10 feet into the pen. 3 parallel lines where a rope or a chain had been drawn too tight too fast, and older marks beneath those, faded to pale seams in the hide. No one scarred an animal like that by accident. Someone had used force as a first resort instead of a last one, more than once, likely more than one someone. The third thing was the flinch. When she had first put her palm flat against its shoulder, before the trembling stopped, before the humming settled it, there had been a flinch that ran the whole length of its body, quick as a struck match. She had felt that flinch before, in cows too head-shy to be milked without a fight, in horses that would not be caught in open pasture, no matter how gentle the hand holding the rope. It was not the flinch of an animal born wrong. It was the flinch of an animal taught, through repetition, that hands meant pain. She thought of the rancher's face at the rail, hat in his hands, saying nothing. She did not think of it with satisfaction. She had not done what she did to prove a point to him, though she understood now that it had proved one anyway, the way truth sometimes did, without asking permission. She thought instead of the 2 hired hands the bull had already put in the dirt, and wondered, without yet having the standing to ask, what those men had done in the weeks and months before that first injury, what habits had been allowed to harden into method, because no one above them had known enough, or cared enough, to ask why a bull that size kept turning vicious under their hands, and gentle under no hands at all. She banked the thought the way she banked a fire, low and covered, not because it did not matter, but because morning would come, whether she finished thinking it tonight or not, and there was still the matter of her own supper, and the walk to the well before the water froze at the lip of the bucket. 3 weeks passed in the ordinary way weeks pass, when a woman is busy and has no one waiting on her account. She led a farrier's mare through a difficult foaling on the second week, sat up with the animal until past midnight, with her coat rolled under the mare's head, and was paid 4 bits and a jar of preserves for the trouble. She mended a fence for the widow 2 doors down in exchange for flour. The frost came earlier that year than most remembered, and she woke some mornings to find the inside of her window glazed white, the pattern of it different each day, like something writing and erasing itself before she could read what it said. She did not think of the rancher in those 3 weeks, so much as she thought around him, the way a person avoids stepping on a floorboard that creaks. She heard, secondhand, from the woman at the feed store counter, that 2 more of his hands had quit, that the bull called Caesar had refused feed for the better part of a week, and then taken it only from a boy of 14 who had never been told to fear the animal. She heard this the way she heard most things in Millbrook Crossing, sideways, half-finished, colored by whoever told it, and she let it settle without deciding what it meant. He came on a Thursday, in weather that had turned raw and wet, riding a horse she recognized before she recognized him, and she watched him from the window above the feed store dismount stiffly, tie the reins with more care than the knot required, and stand a long moment in the mud looking up at her door as though it might answer the question for him before he had to ask it. She let him knock twice. He stood in the narrow hallway with his hat in both hands, water running off the brim onto the floorboards, and he did not come in when she opened the door, only stood there as if the threshold itself were a kind of fence he had not yet decided he had the right to cross. "I've a proposition," he said, and then seemed to hear how the word sounded and started again. "A position, livestock manager, $18 the month, and board at the house, separate quarters, respectable." He said the last word too quickly, as though he had rehearsed it and distrusted his own delivery. "I'm losing hands faster than I can hire them, and the ones that stay are doing more harm than the animals ever did. He did not say sorry. He did not say bull or fair or the words he had used in front of the crowd, and she understood that this was as close to an accounting as he intended to give. A ledger balanced not with apology but with wages, which was, she thought, the only currency he trusted to mean anything. She looked at him a long moment, at the water still dripping from his hat onto the boards between them, and did not answer yet. She said yes 3 days later, not to him but to his foreman, who came to fetch her answer, as if the asking itself were beneath the rancher's notice, now that the moment of rain and hat brims had passed. She packed what she owned into a trunk that had been her father's, and a wagon carried her out along the river road to a ranch she had only ever seen from a distance, its buildings low and long against the yellowing hills, its corrals stretching farther than any she had worked before. She did not begin with the bull. She began with a notebook, plain and cheap, bought from the mercantile with her own coin, before her first wage was ever paid, and in it she wrote down what she saw, not what she was told. She watched the hands work the herd in the mornings, before the heat rose, and what she watched troubled her more than the bull ever had. A hot shot, applied without hesitation to a heifer that had only hesitated at the chute. A rope drawn too tight around a cow's hind leg, cinched by a man who called it discipline. Shouting, always shouting, as though volume were a tool that could substitute for patience, and she noted which animals startled at the sound, and which had gone past startling into a kind of permanent flinch, ears back, eyes rolling white at the edges, even when no one stood near them. She wrote the names the hands used: Old Red, the Spanish cow, the black-faced one with the torn ear, because the ranch kept no ledger of temperament, only of weight and sire, and the dates of failed service, and she began to see in the columns of failure a pattern no one else had thought to look for. The cows that refused to stand for breeding were not, as the foreman insisted, simply contrary by nature. They were the ones handled roughest at the chute, roped hardest, shocked oftenest. She matched dates, she matched hands. She found that 3 cows serviced under a particular man's watch had failed 4 seasons running, and that the same cows, moved and fed by a boy of perhaps 16, who spoke to them low and did not carry a hot shot at all, ate from his hand without hesitation. She did not say any of this aloud yet. She had learned, tending sick animals alone after her father died, that a truth spoken too early to a man protecting his own methods would be met with argument rather than sight, and so she waited, and watched, and wrote, filling the notebook's pages with small, neat observations that no one else on the ranch thought worth the ink. In the evenings, she sat by the lamp in her separate, respectable quarters and read back over what she had recorded, and felt, for the first time since the fairground pen, something that was not quite triumph, but was close enough to it that she did not examine it too closely. The frost came early that year, laying a thin white breath over the corral fence by the 3rd week of September, and it was on one such morning, her fingers stiff inside her gloves, that she found the ledger the foreman kept apart from the one the rancher saw. It was tucked beneath a feed sack in the tack room, its pages soft with handling, and she almost did not open it, believing at first it held nothing but grain counts. What it held instead were dates crossed through and rewritten, injuries logged as accidents of the animal's temper rather than of the hand that caused them. A hired man's name appeared 6 times beside the word. Spooked. When she herself had seen him drive a heifer into a fence post with a length of chain the week before, she did not confront him. She copied what she found into her own notebook, in her own hand, beside her own dates, and she began to watch the foreman rather than only the men he oversaw. She saw, within days, the shape of it. He did not strike the animals himself, not often. His failure was quieter, and in its way more thorough. He shielded the men who did, softened their reports before they reached the rancher's ear, because the rancher's temper when roused was a thing the whole bunkhouse had learned to rout around rather than risk. A man who lost a calf to rough handling lost also, if the truth reached the house, his position and his winter wages, and so the foreman, not cruel himself, had built a habit of covering, the way a roof is patched again and again. over the same rotten beam, rather than the beam being replaced. She understood then that what she was tending was not one bad hand or one stubborn animal, but a whole inherited posture, passed down the way a limp is passed down in a family that has forgotten which grandfather broke the leg. The rancher shouted, and so the foreman absorbed the shouting before it could reach the men, and the men, to avoid earning it, hid their methods, and the animals paid the difference in flesh and fear. No single man on the place had built this. All of them had kept it standing. She thought of her father's barn, small and threadbare as it had been, where there had been no one to shout and so no one to hide from, and she understood for the first time exactly why her hands had learned what they had learned in that particular quiet. She wrote the word, fear. At the top of a new page, underlined once, and beneath it, began to list, plainly, without heat, every instance she could now trace back through the ledger's crossed-out lines. She did not yet know what she would do with the page, but she knew she would not be able to leave it closed much longer. The cow came into the discussion 3 days later, in the flat voice the foreman used for problems he had already decided how to solve. A red heifer, 2 years old, who had refused the bull twice and thrown a hind leg hard enough to crack a rail the second time. The men wanted to rope her against the snubbing post, hobble the leg, and hold her still by force until the thing was done. It was, the foreman said, how it had always been handled when an animal proved difficult. He said it the way a man recites a psalm he has stopped believing but still finds useful. She listened without interrupting, which the men had learned by then meant she was building an answer rather than lacking one. When she spoke, she said the heifer was not difficult. She was afraid, and fear in a 2-year-old animal that had never been handled roughly before was new fear, recent fear, and new fear could still be unlearned if no one hurried it. She asked for 10 days. Feed the heifer apart from the others. Let her get used to a hand on her flank at feeding time. Nothing more, until the hand stopped meaning anything at all. Only then walk her toward the bull, and only if she walked there without the rope. The foreman said 10 days was 10 days lost, and the rancher wanted calves by spring, and a rancher who wanted calves by spring was not a man who paid wages to wait on an animal's feelings. She said she was not asking him to wait on feelings. She was asking him to wait on flesh healing over fear, the same way it healed over a wound, which took the time it took regardless of what a ledger wanted. She told him plainly, in front of 2 hands who had stopped pretending to be occupied with harness leather, that she would not hold a rope for this, and would not stand by while it was done another way, and if that cost her the position she had been given 3 weeks before, she would take that cost rather than the other. It was a small sentence, said without heat, and it hung in the barn air like the last note of the bell. The foreman did not answer at once. He looked toward the house, where the rancher's window showed no light yet, and seemed to be weighing which fear was larger, the fear of a woman's stubbornness, or the fear of a shouted voice, come spring, if the calves were late. He said, at last, that she could have her 10 days, but if the heifer bred nothing by first frost, it would be done the old way, and no one would ask her leave to do it. She said that was fair, and turned back to her page, where the word fear still stood underlined at the top, waiting, she now understood, for exactly this kind of answer beneath it. The 7 days that followed were counted, not lived. She marked each on the ledger page beside the underlined word, a small tally in graphite, the way she had once marked fevers in cattle to see if they broke or worsened. The heifer did not improve in any way a man watching from the fence could measure. She stood at the rail each morning with her feed bucket and her low voice, and the animal watched her with the same flat, unmoved eye it had shown on the first day, ears pinned, weight shifted back on its haunches, as if measuring the distance to the far corner. By the 5th day, word had gone around the bunkhouse that the new manager's patience had run its course, and found nothing at the bottom of it. By the 6th, the foreman stopped merely watching from the harness room and began to stand at the rail himself in the mornings, arms crossed, saying nothing, which was its own kind of accusation. On the 7th, he did not wait for the house lamps. He came to the barn before she had finished measuring the grain, and told her plainly that he intended to speak with the rancher that evening, that 10 days or no 10 days, a week of a stubborn animal costing them silage and time, was reason enough to bring the matter forward early. He said the herd could not run on hope. He said the men needed to see something besides a woman talking to a cow that would not be talked to. She did not argue the sense of it. She had learned, in the years alone after her father's passing, that arguing sense with a frightened man rarely moved anything but his temper. Instead, she asked for the seventh day itself, uninterrupted, before he spoke to anyone, not the 10th, only the one already begun. He looked at her for a long moment, the kind of look a man gives a debt he is unsure he wants to collect, and said she could have until sundown, no later, and that he would be at the rail to see it for himself. She spent the morning doing nothing that would have satisfied a watching eye. She sat on an overturned bucket outside the pen for 2 hours, with her hands still in her lap, not reaching, not calling, simply present, the way she had once sat outside a dying mare's stall the whole length of a night without touching it, because some animals needed a witness before they needed a hand. The heifer's ears came forward twice before noon. She wrote nothing of it down. She had learned that some things were better held quietly, close to the chest, until they had proven themselves worth the ink, and she was not yet certain, watching the animal's flank rise and fall in the cold morning light, whether this was one of them. By noon, the wind shifted, carrying the smell of the low pasture up through the fence rails, and the heifer's head turned toward it before turning back to her, which she counted as a small thing, though she did not let herself count it for much. She rose from the bucket only once, to move it 3 feet closer, and sat again. The foreman came by twice that morning, said nothing the first time, and the second time asked if she intended to sit there until the animal died of old age. She told him that was not likely, given the animal's age, and he walked off without an answer for that. The rancher came at midday, alone, and stood at the rail with his arms crossed the way he had stood at the fairground pen a year before, though there was less certainty in it now than there had been then. He did not ask her progress. He watched the heifer's ears, the same as she did, and after a while, he said that his foreman wanted the week's grace cut short, that there was a buyer coming from 2 counties over who wanted to see stock handled the old way, quick and rough and finished by supper, and that a buyer's opinion carried weight a hired hand's patience did not. She did not argue the buyer. She said only that the animal was answering, slowly, and that slow was not the same as failing, and that he had seen for himself once what a frightened animal looked like when it was given time instead of a rope, and asked him to remember what he had seen. He was quiet long enough that she thought he might not answer at all. Then he said that his foreman had been with him 11 years, since before the ranch had turned a profit, and that a man did not owe a debt like that to a woman on a bucket, however sound her hands were. He said it without cruelty, the way a man states a fact about weather or debt, and she did not flinch from it, only waited, because she had learned that flinching cost more than it ever earned back. He looked at the heifer a long while, then he said she could have the week, the full one, not the interrupted remainder of it, and that he would tell his foreman himself, so there would be no mistaking whose decision it was. He said it was the last week he would give on his own authority, without the foreman's blessing, and that after it, whatever came of the animal would decide the matter for good, one way or the other. She thanked him plainly, the way she thanked him for wages, without warmth added for the occasion, though something in her chest loosened at the words. My own authority. As if a door she had not noticed closing had been quietly reopened. He walked back toward the house without looking at the heifer again, and she stayed on the bucket until the light went long and gold across the pasture, and the animal, for the first time, did not startle when she finally stood. The heifer took the bull on the 9th day of the given week, quiet as anything, standing for it in the corner of the paddock while 2 hands watched from the fence rail and said nothing, because there was nothing left to say that hadn't already been proven wrong. She wrote the date in the ledger she kept in her own hand, separate from his, because she had learned early that numbers written twice, in 2 books, in 2 kinds of ink, held more weight against a foreman's memory than numbers written once. Then she waited the way she had waited on the bucket, without hurry, without hope dressed up as certainty, because a taking did not mean a keeping, and she had seen enough barren seasons to know the difference between an animal bred and an animal carried. The weeks passed in the ordinary labor of the ranch. Feed and water and the mending of a fence line the wind had taken down twice in October, and she did not speak of the heifer except to note her condition in the ledger on the mornings she checked her, a line of small observations that meant nothing to anyone who read them, and everything to her. By the first frost, the animal's flank had begun to swell in the way that could not be argued with, and the foreman, passing the paddock on his way to the tack shed, stopped and looked at her a long moment, and said only that it looked like she'd taken, and moved on, and that was the whole of his concession. But she understood by then that a whole concession from a man like that had never been coming, and a partial one, given plainly, was worth more than she had once thought. She kept the count that winter the way she kept everything else. In the small hours before the rest of the ranch woke, by lamplight, the numbers laid out in columns. She had ruled herself with a straight edge, because a crooked column offended her more than a bad season did. 3 calvings the year before he had hired her. That was where the ranch had stood, out of a herd that should have thrown 20, and she had not needed him to tell her what that number meant about the men who had worked the stock before her, because the number had told her everything the men themselves would not. By the time the ground began to soften again, the tally in her ledger stood at 11 confirmed, with 6 more showing the early signs she trusted more than she trusted her own optimism. And if the count held, if the weather held, if the grass came in early enough to carry the mothers through, the ranch stood to close the season with a breeding rate no operation in the county had matched in memory. She did not say this to him outright. She only left the ledger open on the kitchen table one evening, the columns facing up, and went out to check the gate latch before the dark came down entirely. He came in from the gate and read the columns without being asked to, standing over the table with his hat still on, and when he looked up, he did not say what she expected him to say. He asked how she had done it. Not the numbers, the men. She had not done it all at once. She had taken them one at a time, the way she took a nervous animal, because a man handled roughly by other men for 20 years did not unlearn it in a single morning, any more than a horse unlearned the whip. The youngest hand, barely past boyhood, she had started with, since he had the least to defend. She had him sit an hour with a cow that would not settle, doing nothing but breathing slow and keeping his hands still, until the animal's ear turned toward him instead of away. He had come in that evening looking as though he had learned something he did not have words for yet, and she had let that be enough. The older hands took longer. One of them, a man who had broken horses the old way for 15 years and took pride in it, fought her without ever saying so. He did the work she asked, and did it wrong on purpose, rough where she had told him gentle, fast where she had told him slow, until a heifer went lame, from being crowded through a gate too quick, and he stood in the yard waiting for her to shout at him, the way a boss ought to. She did not shout. She walked him back through the gate at the pace it should have been done, twice, 3 times, until his own hands remembered a patience his pride had forgotten they owned. He never apologized. He simply stopped doing it wrong. By the deep of winter, the yard had a different sound to it. Not the barking and cursing that used to carry to the house on cold mornings, but a low, steady murmur, men talking to animals the way she talked to them, careful, unhurried, as though loud words might cost something none of them could afford to lose twice. The foreman noticed it before he admitted it. He watched the crew move through morning chores without a single raised voice, and said nothing for 3 more days, and when he finally spoke, it was not praise, only a fact, stated flat, the way a man states weather. Said the herd was calmer than he'd seen it in 10 years, said it like it cost him something to say. She wrote that down too, in the margin of the ledger, where the numbers could not hold it but she wanted it kept anyway. The mare came in lathered on a Tuesday, 3 weeks past the foreman's flat weather report of praise, and the hand who brought her was the same one who had laughed loudest at the pen the day it all began. He had gone stiff and red-eared when she'd first shown him how to stand at a shoulder instead of a head, how to let a hand rest before it pulled. He had not laughed since October. The mare had caught a wire fence in the dark and come away with a shallow gash along her flank, not deep, but enough to send her circling the round pen with her eyes showing white, enough that 2 other hands backed off and called for rope. The young one did not call for rope. He stood at the rail a long moment, the way he'd watched her stand 100 mornings, and then he went in slow, hands low, voice pitched down under the wind, and he let the mare choose the distance instead of closing it for her. It took him longer than it would have taken the woman. It took him the better part of 20 minutes, but the mare stopped circling and stood and led him near the wound, and when the foreman came around the barn corner and saw it, he did not move for a while either. He found the rancher at the tack room door that evening, hat still on, boots still crusted, and he did not soften the words to make them easier to say. He calmed her without a single rope, he said. 10 minutes, maybe less, didn't touch her rough once. The rancher looked up from the ledger he'd been pretending to read. That's the hand who used to swear worst of any of them, the foreman said, as though the fact needed placing beside the other, so the weight of it would land right. Learned it off her, not off me, not off anybody I taught him. He did not say it was right. He did not say he'd been wrong to doubt it. He was not a man built for that kind of sentence, and everyone on the place knew it. But he stood there a moment longer than the report required, turning his hat brim once between his fingers, and then he said, the only thing that mattered, plain as a nail driven straight. Guess we do it her way from here. The rancher wrote nothing down. He only nodded, once, and went back to the ledger, and outside, the wind kept moving snow along the fence line, the way it had, all that long, patient winter, quietly and without complaint. The days lengthened by inches through that stretch of winter, the way they always did before anyone trusted the change enough to say it aloud. And with the longer light came a small alteration in the shape of the evenings themselves. She had eaten alone at the bunkhouse table for months, taking her plate after the hands had cleared out, keeping the habit of a woman who had learned not to expect company. Then, without either of them naming it as a decision, the rancher began coming in later than the crew, after the lamps in the main house had already been lit, and sitting across from her at the long table with his own plate, and neither of them found it strange enough to comment on. They spoke of the herd mostly. Which cows were carrying, which had slipped, which of the young stock showed the makings of good temperament, and which would need watching come spring. He had taken, over those weeks, to laying a matter before her before he settled it, not asking permission exactly, but pausing, the way a man pauses at a gate he has learned squeaks, and waiting to hear what she thought before he pushed it open. Thinking on selling the roan heifer, he said one evening, working a piece of bread through the gravy on his plate. She's slow to breed, not barren, slow. She did not look up from her own plate when she said it. Give her another season. He considered this, the way he considered most things she told him now, without argument, weighing it against nothing but its own plainness, and said only, another season then, and that was the end of it. There was no ceremony in these exchanges, no softness offered up for its own sake. But there was, underneath the talk of heifers and feed stores and the state of the north fence, a kind of company that had not existed in that house before her, a settling of two people into the same rhythm of a day's end, the same tiredness in the shoulders, the same quiet before the fire burned down and one of them rose to banquet. She noticed, without remarking on it even to herself, that she had stopped counting the months of her wage in her head at the end of each week. She noticed that he had stopped looking at her the way a man looks at hired help, and started looking at her the way a man looks at someone whose judgment he has come, slowly, to trust more than his own. Neither of them said what that meant. It was not yet time for that. The snow came in February, the kind that erased the fence lines and turned the barn into an island. She had been watching a heifer for 3 days by then, a young cow bred late in the season, her belly low and her eyes glassy, with a discomfort that had nothing patient in it. On the third night, the wind rose to a pitch that rattled the loft boards, and the cow went down in the straw, with a sound that was not quite a bellow and not quite a groan, and she knew before she put her hand inside that the calf was turned wrong. She sent the boy who slept above the tack room running for the rancher, and by the time he came through the barn door with snow still melting in his collar, she already had her sleeve rolled to the shoulder and her arm inside the cow to the elbow, feeling for a foot that was folded back where it should have been forward. He did not ask what he could do. He knelt beside her in the straw, held the lantern where she told him to hold it, and put his weight against the cow's flank when the contractions came hard enough to throw her sideways. Hours passed that neither of them measured. The wind found every seam in the barn wall, and the lantern oil burned low twice before he rose without a word and refilled it. She talked the whole time, not to him, to the cow, the same low, even stream of sound she used on every frightened animal. And somewhere past midnight he realized he had begun matching his breathing to the rhythm of her voice, without deciding to. When the foot came forward at last, and then the second, she pulled with the contractions, not against them, and told him when to add his strength, and when to stop entirely, and he did exactly as told. A man built to move mountains, taking direction from her hands, as though there had never been any other order to things. The calf came into the cold in a rush of steam, wet and still for one long, terrible second, before it shuddered and drew breath, and she had it rubbed dry with a burlap sack before either of them spoke. He looked at the calf, then at her, snow-damp and streaked with blood and straw, and said only, "You saved them both." She said the cow had done the work. He did not argue the point, but something in the way he watched her wipe her hands on her apron told her the accounting between them had shifted again, quietly, the way it always did. One more debt of trust paid down, with no ledger kept, and none needed. By August, the count kept itself. 14 calves born since spring, 11 of them without a hand laid on the mother beyond her own, and only one loss, a bull calf too big for its dam, taken despite everything she knew to try. The rest of the county heard it the way counties always hear things. A word at the grain mill, a number repeated at church, a rancher 2 valleys over asking who was running the cane operation these days, because whatever they were doing, it was working better than anything he'd seen in 20 years of breeding stock on the high plains. She did not go looking for the credit. It found her anyway, the way smoke finds the eaves. The letter came on a Tuesday, delivered by the same boy who had once run the ring gate the year she walked into the pen, and no one expected her to walk out standing. It was addressed to her directly, not to the ranch, not to him, in the careful hand of the fair committee's secretary, and it asked, with none of the apology such a letter ought to have carried, whether she would consent to judge the livestock competition at the county fair come September. She read it twice at the kitchen table, then set it down and went back to skimming cream, as though the words needed time to settle before she could decide what they weighed. He found the letter later, still sitting where she'd left it, and read it standing in his hat and coat with mud still on his boots. He did not say anything for a long moment. The clock on the mantel ticked through most of a minute before he spoke. "Same committee." "Same committee," she said. "Same men who stood at the rope and laughed. Some of them." He looked at her the way a man looks at a fence line he built himself, and forgot the true shape of, uncertain now whether he had raised it or she had, whether the whole year had been his doing, or merely his good fortune to be standing nearby, while she did the work of rebuilding something he'd nearly let rot to the ground. It was not jealousy that moved through him, not quite. It was closer to the feeling of a man realizing the ground had shifted under a house he thought he owned outright, and that the house was, in fact, hers as much as his, had perhaps always been more hers than he'd allowed himself to admit. "You'll go," he said. It was not a question, though it sounded almost like one. "I'll go," she said, and went back to the cream, her hands steady, her face giving nothing more away than the letter itself had, folded now, waiting on the table between them like a decision already made. He did not bring it up again that evening, nor the next. He let 3 days pass, the way he let a green heifer settle into a new pen before he touched her, though whether he knew he was doing it that way she never asked. The days themselves were unremarkable. Frost on the trough in the mornings now, the first hard color turning in the cottonwoods along the creek, the herd moving heavier through the low pasture as the grass thinned. She logged the breeding numbers in the ledger she'd kept since spring, the columns filling in a hand steadier than his had ever been, and did not think much on the letter beyond what dress she owned that might do for standing inside a rope instead of outside one. He found her at the rail on a Thursday, mending a length of gate hinge She'd already mended twice that month, the metal gone soft with rust, and needing replacing rather than repair, though neither of them had said so aloud. He stood a while without speaking, the way he did when he was working something loose in himself, before letting it out into the air, where it could not be taken back. "The season's near done," he said finally. "Wages run through October, same as always." "I know it." After that, he turned the toe of his boot against a stone in the dirt, not looking at her, looking instead at the pasture where the improved herd grazed dark and calm against the pale grass. "I'm not asking you to stay on for wages." She set the hinge down. "I'm asking you to stay," he said, "because the place doesn't run right without you in it, and neither do I, not as manager and owner, as—" He stopped, the word plain and unpracticed in his mouth, a man who had never once in his life had to reach for it before, "as partner, in the operation." And past it. There was no crowd behind him this time, no rope, no laughter waiting to close over whatever she answered. Only the wind moving low through the grass, and the herd's quiet chewing, and the particular stillness of a man who had said the truest thing he knew how to say, and now had to stand in it. She looked at him the way she had once looked at a bull nobody else would enter a pen for, steady, unhurried, taking the whole animal in, before deciding where to place a hand. "I'll stay," she said, "on those terms, and no others." He nodded once, as if she'd confirmed a fact he'd already suspected about the weather, or the ground, or himself. And neither of them moved to touch the other, not yet. There would be time enough for that, the way there had been time enough for everything else that had mattered. The fair returned to Millbrook Crossing on the same first Saturday of September, the dust rising off the same trampled grass, the same striped tent sagging a little more than it had the year before. She walked the fairgrounds not along the outer rope where the crowd stood elbow to elbow, but inside it, where the judges walked, a ribbon box under one arm and her boots already dark with manure and dew. She judged the swine first, then the sheep, moving down each line with her hand flat against a flank, her eyes on the set of a leg, the clarity of an eye, things no one else in that crowd had troubled themselves to notice in years of coming to look and laugh. The men who had once stood along the rail laughing, now stood along the rail watching, and said nothing, because there was nothing in her manner that invited it. The bulls came last. His stood at the head of the line, the finest animal the county had seen in a decade, glossy and huge and calm under a boy's hand, in a way that would have been unthinkable a year before. Beside it, near the end of the row, a thin boy of perhaps 12 held the lead of a modest red heifer, undersized, plain-coated, raised on a widow's few acres, with more patience than money. She walked the length of the line twice. She placed her hand on the heifer's shoulder and felt the animal lean into it the way a well-handled animal leans, trusting, unafraid. And she looked at the boy's raw knuckles and the careful mend in his shirt and understood exactly what those hands had cost him. She pinned the ribbon to the heifer. A murmur went through the rail, not unkind, only startled, and somewhere in it she heard his voice, low, unsurprised, telling whoever stood near him that she'd judged it fair. He did not argue it. He had not expected her to spare him, and did not want to be spared. She finished the day's work with the same steadiness she had carried into every pen for a year, filed her notes, thanked the fair committee, and walked home along the road that ran past the tavern, where men who had once called her unmarriageable now simply nodded, hats lifted an inch, nothing more required of them or of her. Her hands were raw from the morning's work, and would be raw again tomorrow. She did not need the ribbon, or the crowd's good opinion, or anyone's permission to walk that road as she was. She had built what she had with those two hands, one patient hour at a time, and that, at last, was the whole of what anyone needed to know about her.